Welcome to Q&A practice. Let's start out with defense attorney. Ready? Here we go. Well, now that you know that it was him, what are your thoughts about it? Objection, sustained. Do you have any reflections on objection? On the fact that you taught Jahar and you now know that he was involved in the bombing? Objection, sustained. Do you think that Jahar had you fooled in high school? Objection, no, I don't. Never mind, I'll withdraw it, Your Honor. And I thank you. The answer can stand. Thank you very much. The prosecutor may have some questions. Mr. Traub, you would agree that the defendant was self-motivated, correct? As a student, yes. From you're testifying about your experiences with him, right? Yeah, and you wrote that he motivates himself, right? Yes. So he's self-motivated, correct? He was self-motivated in the classroom, good. He was mature, yeah, he was mature for a high school kid. And he was smart, correct? He was smart. Thank you. Anything else? All right, Mr. Traub, thank you. You may step down. Defense calls Kevin Roach. My name is Kevin Michael Roach. Last name is R-O-C-H-E. Good afternoon, Mr. Roach. Good afternoon, Counselor. Mr. Roach, where do you work? For the United States Marshal Service. What's your position? I'm a Deputy U.S. Marshal. And how long have you worked for the Marshal Service? For 17 years. And has that always been in Boston? Yes, ma'am. And is that your current assignment? Yes. And were you working as a U.S. Marshal back on April 19, 2013 when Jahar Tsarnaev was arrested? April 20th, excuse me. What was the date again? April 20th, 2013. That was the Friday. Friday was the 19th. 20th was Saturday. I was not working Saturday, no. Okay, did you encounter Mr. Tsarnaev shortly after he was taken into federal custody? Yes, ma'am. And where did that occur? At the Beth Israel Hospital on Sunday. I think that was the 21st. And do you see Mr. Tsarnaev in the courtroom? I do. From the time of his arrest to, let's say, the date of his first appearance in this courthouse on July 10, 2013. How many times did you personally interact with Mr. Tsarnaev prior to this arraignment? I would say half dozen probably. And tell us what your role was and how you came to interact with him. On the Sunday after his apprehension, the judge magistrate, Marianne Bowler, came to the hospital to give him his initial appearance in the hospital, and from that point on he became a Marshal Service in custody detainee. He remained at the hospital that day, and we had a detail on him while he was at the hospital until the time of his discharge. And could you explain what you mean by a detail? There were maybe 6 of us that were inside the actual wing that he was being treated in, and then there was another law enforcement throughout the hospital for security purposes, but we stayed with him the entire time he was in the hospital. And you were part of that detail? Yes, ma'am. And was Deputy U.S. Marshal Gary Olive also part of that detail? Not the day that I was there. I did a 12-hour shift from the Sunday that he had his initial appearance until Monday morning. I'm sure that he did. I think everyone in the district did at some point. At some point with Mr. Tsarnaev transferred to the Federal Medical Center at Devens, he was. And that was, again, he was still in federal custody, yes. And after his transfer out of Beth Israel, did you have interaction with him as part of your duties as a U.S. Marshal? Your Honor, objection to this line as irrelevant. Its foundation, Your Honor. There's no question about the foundation. Well, I'll make a proffer at sidebar, Your Honor, but, well, yeah, let me see you. You seem to be taking a while to get to the point. Well, no, the point is that in his interactions with him, he was never defiant, hostile, or uncooperative, and that's exactly the point. The July 10th event is what the government wants to focus on. Your Honor, 2 days when he lay in the bed in Beth Israel, he wrote one defiant note after another. He couldn't be defiant physically. He was physically, I was getting to after he went to Devens. I just had to establish when he first went there. Now we're talking. They're trying to draw these fine lines, and I'm done with Beth Israel. No, but it's fair game for them to point out that he was defiant on other occasions. I'm talking about this. He's not been defiant. He has not been defiant. He just said, I don't know what the evidence is. He's talking about the interrogation by the FBI. The government said they're not offering. I'm talking about his interaction. We're not offering it. in our case in chief, but to cross-examine him to rebut a claim. The defense isn't entitled to put on a one-sided presentation and then keep out evidence that contradicts it. The jury's being misled, first of all. I think it opens the door to evidence of defiance if they have it. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is either, but be warned, it opens, even if it's during the course of an unmirandized interrogation, which I think is what they're talking about. I don't know. I'll have to hear what it is. Well, if it's statements by the defendant, we have not been given discovery under Rule 16A1A. They have all the statements. I'm just, okay, I think you may have to be careful because I think it may open the door to something you don't want. I'm sorry. It would help if the government would tell me what they're talking about because I'm not aware of what they're talking about. We don't need to preview our cross-examination. All the statements the defendant made at Beth Israel were produced to the defense. It's up to the jury to decide if they were defiant statements or not. We happen to believe that many of them were. I do not want to ask whether he was defiant at Beth Israel. I just want to establish when he first met him and under what circumstances. The question is, was he defiant? That wasn't the question. I'm focusing. If you focus on a particular quality like defiance, they can meet with a particular quality, a more general focused quality of what his demeanor was might not. Okay. Were there occasions when you escorted Mr. Tsarnaev to medical appointments from Devon's? Yes, I believe. On at least 2 occasions, and on those occasions, what was his demeanor in his interaction with you? On the first time that we took him to a hospital, I believe he was still pretty lethargic. He seemed like he was pretty fresh from his discharge, and he may have still been medicated. And when you say fresh from his discharge, did you actually observe physical injuries? Yes. And specifically, did you observe physical injuries to his face? I did. What did you observe? He had a wound that appeared to have been sutured and his head was deformed. I believe it was his left side of his head seemed swollen. And did you notice anything about his mouth? Not to my recollection, no. Were you aware that he had been shot in the face? Yes, I take that back. I'm sorry. I knew he had an upper body wound and a hand wound and a leg wound. I don't know. I mean, other than the obvious suture, that was my first indication. And when you escorted him to medical appointments, did you give him instructions? I did. And did he follow those instructions? He did. And I want to turn your attention to July 10th, 2013. And that was the day that Mr. Tsarnaev first came to this courthouse for his arraignment, correct? Yes, ma'am. And have you seen the video of a gesture he made to the camera in the cell block? I have. Now you're familiar with the cell block? Yes. And are you familiar with the camera in the cell block? Yes. And by the way, what was your assignment that day on July 10, 2013? I was part of the team that moved him from the facility here on that morning, and then I don't recall if I actually escorted him to court that day. I believe I did. At some point, did you go with a supervisor to speak to him about becoming aware of a gesture that he made to the camera? Yes, ma'am. And what did? And when you spoke to him, or your supervisor spoke to him on that occasion, how would you describe his demeanor? It was very brief, that discussion we had with him, and his demeanor was he basically listened to what we had to say, and he didn't have much to offer. Did he apologize? He did. Have you seen other detainees use the housing on that camera as sort of a reflection or a mirror? Yes. Objection to others? No. Overruled. That may stand. And after you spoke with him that day, did you receive any report? Strike that. Was he given any instructions at that time? Was he given instructions? Yes, in your presence he was. And did he follow those instructions? Well, let me clarify that. I don't know if we gave him instructions, but we addressed what we had observed and informed him that that was not going to be tolerated here in this house, and it was going to be dealt with if it continued, and asked him if he had any plans to continue that behavior. And what did he say? And he said, no, I'm done, I'm sorry. And did he engage in any other behavior like that day in the cell block? Not that day, no. In your experience, what types of things have images done in the cell block? You name it. We've seen attempted suicides in our cell block. inmate on inmate assaults. They flood the toilets. You know, they act out verbally, physically to each other. Do they ever act out verbally to you? Anyone or him? Other detainees? Yes. And have you ever strike that? In terms of the hand gesture, would that normally result in writing up an incident report? I would. It would depend on the detainee. Different inmates rise to a different level of attention from the Marshal service in what's considered, important or significant. I can say, in my experience, I've never written a report about a hand gesture. May I have a moment, please? Thank you very much, Mr. Roach. I don't have any further questions for you at this time. All right, that will conclude our Q&A practice.